Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I hope that whatever time of the day or day of the week it is that you are listening to this podcast, your time is going well, that you have found some time to relax, do things that you enjoy, read a good book, of course. I personally love to bake, and today, instead of baking something that I would then eat all of, and generally something that's not healthy for me, cookies. I instead made cookies for my dogs. I have 2 Chihuahuas. I think I've probably mentioned that before, and so I made them peanut butter pumpkin cookies. Just 5 ingredients, and I make my own peanut butter, so I know all the ingredients that are going into it, and they love them, so that's good. I feel pretty good about the baking that I did today, and hopefully my dogs do as well. They get very excited about num-nums, so I feel as though I've done my job as a puppy mommy today. So now I shall do my job as a podcast host for this episode. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I am speaking today with author Mona Johnson about her memoir. It's called Not Created Equal: An Immigrant Muslim Woman's Pursuit of Equality in Her Family, the Army, and America. And she is listed as the author as Mona Johnson, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army, retired. That is an impressive rank for anyone, but you'll learn why it's even more impressive when you hear some of her story in the interview. Let me go ahead and read you the back of the book. Mona Johnson dreamed of a world where a Muslim woman could be treated as an equal. After escaping a politically divided Egypt, she and her family lived in exile in Saudi Arabia before immigrating to the U.S. in 1960. But assimilating into American culture was far from easy, as the values of her heritage clashed with her pursuit of being a modern feminist. Giving in to her mother's wishes, she became trapped in a 7-year abusive marriage. Forced to endure reprehensible acts of mental and emotional abuse, to include physical attacks, she eventually escaped with her 2 daughters and, with her father's encouragement, began a career in the Army Nurse Corps. Defying years of prejudice and gender inequality, Johnson became one of the first immigrant Arab Muslim women to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces and rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. In this unflinching memoir, Johnson shares for the first time her heartbreaking and joyful journey. Drawing from her experiences as a single parent, Army officer, and Muslim, she demonstrates incredible perseverance traversing Middle Eastern and Western society. Not Created Equal: An Immigrant Muslim Woman's Pursuit for Equality in Her Family, the Army, and America follows a fearless quest to conquer Islamic stereotypes and bias in 2 cultures. If you like relentless determination, battling bigotry, and stories of underestimated American women, then you'll love Mona Johnson's revealing memoir. There you go, the description of this book that we are talking about today. I am so appreciative when people write this type of memoir and share their experiences. It is so wonderful to read lots of different types of experiences, and Mona's is certainly very different, obviously, from my own experience and maybe from a lot of other people's experiences, but it's so important to read memoirs like this, especially about people who are very different from ourselves, so that we can learn about different cultures, we can learn about different people, we can see where the differences and the similarities lie, and we can learn from each other, because this is where we get a lot of fear in society, is when we don't understand something or someone. And so finding ways to learn more and understand people and to get to know them as people and not just as a stereotype or as something that we have built up in our mind is really, really important. And that is what I appreciate so much about this memoir. It's not only a memoir about her experiences in an abusive relationship, in being a single parent, in joining the Army and rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel, but it also tells us about being an immigrant, being a Muslim, trying to navigate society with lots of different levels. She's got her cultural level. She's got the fact that she's an immigrant. There's so many different levels to her story, and I really just appreciate that she shared them with us in this memoir. Let's go ahead and turn now to the interview. Again, the author is Mona Johnson. The book is Not Created Equal: An Immigrant Muslim Woman's Pursuit of Equality in Her Family, the Army, and America.
Hi, Mona. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
I am happy to have you here. We are going to talk about your memoir. It's called Not Created Equal: An Immigrant Muslim Woman's Pursuit of Equality in Her Family, the Army, and America. Before we get to the book, though, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay. I am a retired Army nurse. I spent 20 years in the Army Nurse Corps, but before that, immigrated to America when I was 9 years old from Egypt. So going a little bit backwards, I was born in Cairo, and my family, very close-knit family. My father had a good position with the government, but he was involved in the 1952 coup that ousted the King Farouk of Egypt and assisted Egypt with becoming under their own governance. He was his mentors were Army officers. My father was a police officer, and some of them became presidents of Egypt, like Mohammed Naguib was the first one, Gamal Abdel Nasser the second, and Anwar Sadat the third. But before all this, Nasser, the second one, had done some pretty, I should say, evil things to people who didn't have fealty, didn't swear fealty to him, and would lock them up and torture them. And my father, being in a high position in the police department, he would release these people, and before he knew it, President Nasser found out about it, and that was a sign of treason. So my father had to escape because Nasser wanted his head. So we had to escape Egypt in a hurry, and we lived in Saudi Arabia for 2 years before coming to America, simply because my father had a friend there that could shelter us as we lived there in exile. And I went to school there, and so did my brother. And my parents realized that I could not get an education in Saudi Arabia as a regular civilian girl. My brothers would do well, but I couldn't. So I did go to school for the elementary school for the daughters of the royal family, but that only went to the third grade. And my father wanted more, so he decided to come to America. And this was the seed that started my education. And so we came and lived in Los Angeles and went to school, got educated, went to high school in Monterey, college in San Francisco. And then I married my first husband, and it was not a good marriage, so to speak. And that ended, and when that ended, I decided to go into the U.S. Army. as a nurse. I wanted to be a pilot, but that was not a option for me at the time. So I thought, well, if I went as a nurse, maybe I can be like a flight nurse or something. But it didn't work out that way. But I completed a nice career in the U.S. Army. And I had 2 daughters, and I served in the Army. When I entered when they were 2 and 4, and served for 20 years. And met my second husband 9 years after I was in. And then retired. That's in a nutshell.
All right. Well, that is quite the what's the word I'm looking for? Not impressive, detailed, not detailed. I mean, like just action-packed. Like your early life was full of so much, and the prologue of the book, I think, gives a really good indication of what type of memoir this is going to be, because you talk about your daughter using the phrase that your then husband had been using in this abusive relationship you were in, and so even from the prologue, you can tell this is going to be a story of, not always happy things, but of courage and
an emotionally heavy story.
Yeah.
But it is not only just an emotionally heavy story. There's all kinds of other emotions in there. There is hope, there are bright spots, etc. So it is time for our first break of the podcast. When we come back, I will hopefully be able to find more words than I could when I went from when I tried to say action-packed, which I don't think was actually the word I was looking for at that point. But hey, it was fun vocab with Sarah, I guess, or not so fun vocab with Sarah. When we come back, we will be talking more about Not Created Equal with author Mona Johnson. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Mona Johnson about her memoir, Not Created Equal. Before the break, we heard a bit about the premise of the book, the story of Mona's that she is sharing in this memoir. So let's now go ahead and return back to that interview.
Can you talk about what inspired you to put down your story as a memoir?
Well, initially, I wanted to leave some kind of historical background for my daughters. My family was basically lost in our immigration, meaning my extended family. When we left Egypt, we lost complete touch with most of them. Now, given the fact that this took place in the 60s, well, for initially 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was no internet, of course, and telephone calls were prohibitive cost-wise, and basically amounted to letters once a year or so. And so we didn't have a family like most immigrant groups have here. And I wanted to leave something for my daughters to know where their roots came from. And so I started writing it, and then friends and colleagues had mentioned to me, you need to write this in a book. you need to publish this. And I thought, oh, I don't know. And some of my Army colleagues even told me, this is part of Army history, that I'm the first Arab American Muslim woman who has immigrant Muslim woman, not first, second, or third generation, but an immigrant who has actually served in the U.S. Armed Forces and become an officer and retired. And so I thought, well, that there might be something there. So I started writing it, and just wanted to tell my story for my daughters, my family, my not only nuclear family, but my brothers and their children, and then for other immigrants and other women and other girls and or boys, whoever would be interested, because it is an immigrant story. And the more I thought of it, the more I thought, there are lots and lots of books about Black history and about Native American history and even Asian American history, but very few Arab American history or even Arab Muslim Arab American stories. And so I thought, it'd be nice to kind of put things out there, so educate people who don't know what Islam is, don't know, they kind of paint us with one brush stroke that, Islam is monolithic and all of them are the same, just like, no groups of people from one culture are the same, whether it be religion or different cities or whatever. And so I thought, I would just kind of explore that and explain it, just to educate people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding about Muslims as a whole. I mean, because they get lumped in as a whole, and that is not accurate.
Exactly. And that's a terrorist. As a whole, as terrorists.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. And there is a story in the beginning of your book that kind of highlights some of the differences in that when your family moved to Saudi Arabia, your mom dressed like she dressed in Egypt, and she ran into trouble, not wearing the, how do you say it? Abaya?
Abaya. Yes.
And I think your mom was pretty pretty brave and kick-ass in that scene. But
she was a strong woman.
Yes, it definitely could have gone the other way. So you even get a little bit of an idea that it's not the same everywhere, of course. And then you moved to the U.S., and I'm sure you encountered all kinds of different issues, you and your family.
Oh, yeah, let me count the ways.
Yes. Can I ask you a slightly off topic? Oh, go ahead.
Sure. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, can I ask you a slightly off topic question of how many languages do you speak?
3. I did
okay.
speak 4, but I lost French because I had no one to practice with.
Right.
So as we picked up English, we lost French. So 3 now fluently.
That's still impressive. Okay, because so your mother's family has German heritage. Do you?
Yes.
Do you speak some German still? I mean, there's German references in the book.
Yes, my grandmother was German. Actually, it was kind of a different Egyptian family for us because we have the German part too. And my parents celebrated both cultures. But not only that, but the time period, in the late 50s, because we left Egypt in 57, Egypt was still very westernized. It was not colonized anymore officially, but still culturally, it was very westernized by the British, the Germans, and the French. And the people wore, I mean, you could have been in any European city walking down the streets of Cairo. Whereas now you can tell it's Middle East. So they've essentially gone backwards over the years in terms of their dress and social behaviors and things like that. But my parents were used to American or European music, movies. That's why they wanted to go to California, because the movie stars lived there. So they were used to seeing that. And in many ways, they were westernized. However, they still wanted to keep their Middle Eastern or Egyptian concepts and culture.
Yeah,
so we celebrated Christmas.
Right. I have a slight fascination with families and, you know, blended families, all kinds of families. So I just enjoyed hearing about yours.
I'm going to jump in here so we can take our second break of the podcast. But I will say I really, truly am fascinated and love hearing about different kinds of families, whether those are blended families, whether those are families of mixed race or mixed culture. I am just fascinated by families and how they navigate the differences. Even the families that look like they could be the most similar still have different aspects of their own families of origin to navigate when they come together as a family. So that is obviously a topic for another time or another podcast, but I do love hearing those kinds of stories. Let's go ahead and take that second break. When we come back, we'll be speaking more with Mona, and we'll go to her time when she first immigrated here to the U.S. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Let's just jump right back into the interview with Mona Johnson.
But I did interrupt you earlier, and I apologize for that. You were talking about moving to the U.S., and you moved here in the 60s. So how was that being an immigrant family during that time? During that time. We'll start with it.
It was 1960 in July, and of course we didn't know any English. My father knew English. My mother very, very little, and us kids, my two younger brothers were just toddlers, and then a third one was born here. But my oldest brother and I didn't know any English at all. And when we went to school, I was in 4th grade, and my brother was in 5th grade. Excuse me. And this was the segregation. This was still during segregation. And where my parents moved to was, now they were used to living a good upper middle class lifestyle in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, relatively speaking. So that's where they chose the housing. The housing for minorities was not very nice. And so my parents chose in the nicer places, which meant the white areas. Unbeknownst to us that there was a difference. And so Tariq, my brother, and I were the darkest kids in our schools, and we were teased relentlessly, relentlessly. At first, we didn't understand what they were saying, but of course, as we learned English, we understood, and the cruelty was, you can imagine. So, unlike a lot of other immigrant groups that tend to cluster together, we didn't have anybody to cluster with. There wasn't anybody like us. There were some Arabs in this country, but most of them were Jewish or Christian, but no Muslims, and there was no prayer centers. So there's no place for us to congregate but with our community, which didn't want us. And so as soon as we became citizens, which was 5 years after landing here, my father decided to change our name. And I think that's how it was done back then with immigrants. You want to assimilate so badly, in order to be accepted. So we did. We knew English by then. We moved to another area. Now, my parents had a very heavy accent, so they could never get away from the fact that they were immigrants. But our name change made a big difference until people found out our history, and then it was back same old, same old. And so in many ways, back then, we had to lose our identity in order to fit in and be American. Whereas nowadays, immigrants don't have to do that, They can come here and bring their culture with them. Now, not everybody will like that, but oh well, they can still do it. And they have larger communities. They have networks. They have their groups. And we always felt left out and that we didn't matter. And then we get into the 70s, and Monterey Peninsula College is where my oldest brother and I went to after high school. And they had an Arab American club. And my brother and I joined it. We were the only Arab Americans. Just my brother and I. But the club was all foreign students. There were Arabs from all over and Iranians. And they were all males because they didn't send their daughters overseas.
Right.
And so I got to know that group of people. But then again, I wasn't allowed to date anyone, and plus I wasn't interested in anyone. But then my mother, I was forbidden to date, period. My mother decided that I should, it's time for me to get married. And she knew of a family that had a son in graduate school at Berkeley. And he was from Egypt, and he was Muslim. And she didn't know him, and neither did my father, but they were friends of friends. And gave this family my telephone number, and he called me, and it's all in the book. He called me, and we started dating. And my first gut feeling was, I can't do this. I don't know this guy. I don't like him. I don't like his ways. But I went against that gut feeling and thought, well, I was supposed to marry a Muslim. I was told that my whole life. And I fought it. I rebelled against it, but I eventually gave in. And we got married, and it was very, very abusive from the first day, as you probably read.
It was. I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, for that type of marriage to take place, but I felt kind of betrayed for you on your behalf. Betrayed by your mom. I felt like, I know it's a different time, it's a different culture, but I had this. I felt like she was this strong woman. She was, she had a little bit more of the European sensibilities, and then she kind of not forced you, but heavily talked you into this marriage that turned out to be horrible.
Yeah, and I, I had never dated. I mean, I went out a couple times in college, but what did I know about love and all that? But,
Mhm.
my father felt more betrayed, so to speak, because he didn't know until
Yeah.
he heard from about my engagement, and he
Oh
had
my.
never met him until. Yeah, so
Yeah.
he just
Yeah.
casually asked me, "So how did you guys meet?" And I told him. I didn't know my father didn't know.
Right. Right. Right.
Anyway, so it was a perfect storm, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
The bottom line was he married me to get A, the citizenship, and B, lower tuition.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So you were better off when you left that, and then you went into the Army, and I can only imagine that presented its own challenges, not only because you were a single mother with 2 children, but also, with the fact that you were Arab Muslim woman in a very male-dominated field. Well, you went into nursing, which has more women, but the Army as a whole, very male-dominated.
Absolutely. Now, I went into the Army, had to have a full background check, of course, and secret security clearance. So, of course, they knew everywhere that I lived from the time we came to America, and even before that. So they knew I was an immigrant and where I came from. But they didn't know that I was Muslim because it was not documented anywhere until it came time for me to let them know on my dog tags. That's one of the necessary pieces of information they need in case you become a casualty. I didn't know what to do, so I consulted my father, and he said, "Oh, just tell them that you believe in one God and you're spiritual, and that you're flexible." So I went back to the processing sergeant, the next day.
I don't think they can put all that on dog tags.
That's exactly what he said. He said, "I can't put all that on there." He said, "It's Jewish, Protestant, or Catholic. Which is it, Captain?" So I hesitated. I didn't want to tell him. And so then he says, "I could put NRP." And I said, "What's NRP?" "No religious preference." I said, "Okay, put that." So I left it at that. And that, as far as my records go, was the extent of it. So it's not like I was openly telling everybody that I was Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
This was right after the Iranian crisis, the hostage crisis and the oil embargo, and and it gets worse over the years. So I wasn't very eager to let people know.
No, I don't blame you.
Yeah. So my second husband knew, of course.
Well, yes, I would hope so.
Yeah, and he's Catholic. I'm still married to him, 31 years now, and so he was Catholic, but kind of like not the regular in the box Catholic either. He is very, very liberal, and how should I say? He was very, very kind and spiritual, and to him, religion is just like to me. Religion is man-made. It's not from our source, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So it was never an issue in our marriage, and it was never an issue in raising my daughters.
Time for that last break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Mona Johnson.
You mentioned that you wanted a history, and I know that you are you're a mother and now a grandmother. What do you hope that your daughters, their children, future generations will be able to take from this book?
Well, first and foremost, I guess the culture that we came from. It's a culturally very rich culture on both sides. And I also want them to learn that you can't generalize and assume that just because you come from one part of the world, that everybody from that part of the world is going to be the same. Mm-hmm. And I know that's very general. But even in your community, or even in your church or mosque or wherever, everyone's interpretation of their religion, for one thing, is different. And it's all based on their home life, their culture, their country of origin. And I want them to know that it's flexible. You can't assume. And that was a big mistake that I made when I decided to marry their father, their biological father. I thought, well, he's Egyptian, like my father, and he's Muslim, like my father, and he's educated, so he must be good because my father's good. But it's totally different culture, even though he also came from Cairo. Just totally different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's the same with skin color. And just because someone is a certain skin color doesn't mean that they're all like that. Of course,
right.
We know that.
Of course, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the one thing. I just want people to know that when you hear the word Arab, it's a part of the world, it's a culture, but there are all these subcultures. And the same with the religion. It's just subcultures. And
right.
treat everybody as an individual.
Yeah.
And another thing I want people to learn from this is, on the other side, I don't want them walking away reading the book thinking, oh my God, those Arab men are horrible. Or those Arab Muslim men.
Right, because you've got your first husband as an example, but you've also got your father. And I mean, I'm a little bit in love with your father because of the kind of man he's portrayed as in the book. He seems very kind and wonderful.
Yeah, and my brothers are good examples too. And that's what I want them to know. And my granddaughter, by the way, I only have one, but she's adopted and she's African American. And this has nothing to do with my book, but my youngest daughter married a young man from an American who's a consulate. He works for the State Department, and they are now stationed in Russia. So they're learning all kinds of Russian things. But they're raising an African American baby from the day she was born, and she's 3 now. And now that it's African American History Month, every day my daughter takes a picture of her in a different costume she makes, and then brings the character of that certain person. It's always a African American woman, whether it be historical figure or current figure, and teaches her that way about her culture. And so, education is big in my family because that's the ticket to freedom, and not only freedom financial or freedom physical, but emotional freedom too. That's just an example.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've seen, because of social media, you see a lot of different things, and I've seen other families that have done something similar, and I think it's a great idea, a really hands-on way of learning some history.
Yeah,
and I just love that your family is so diverse and just multicultural, multi-religious. You now you've got a family in Russia. You've lived a long way with your family. It's impressive.
Yeah, I have a sister-in-law that's Japanese, and I have a sister-in-law that's Filipino, and one that's Indonesian.
Oh, wow.
And my cousin's wife is Chinese.
I love that. That's just, I just think that's cool. So in a lot of ways, your story is really kind of the quintessential American story because this country was built on people coming here for a different life. But on the flip side, it's also the quintessential American story in that you've experienced a lot of issues because of who you are, what you look like, what your name was, all of everything that goes along with that. So from your experiences, how has everything shaped your view of America, of being American?
Of being American.
Yeah.
Well, I know I read that. I thought that question over and over again, and in many ways, of course, I am very grateful that my parents came here to this country because I never would have had the opportunities that I would have if we didn't. In other ways, though, I feel that, who knows, if we had stayed in our culture, would we have been a little happier? Because my parents were not happy at all. Jobs fell through, and cultural shock, and my father died young from all the pressures. He was only 66 when he passed away, but it was a hard life, and you can never say, well, what if? I mean, you could say it, but you'd never know the answer. But it shaped me into being a proud American. I'm glad that I'm American. I'm glad that I could have the mental and physical wherewithal to be able to serve. And it was also twofold because I was able to teach my daughters different cultures by traveling to different places through the Army. I went to Germany, went all over Europe while we were in Germany, and then all over the country. Different parts of the country are so different. Alabama versus Maryland. Yeah. So they really, truly got an education as well. And I'm glad. I'm proud, and I know that not many people know about my heritage and serving in the Army simply because I haven't spoken about it much. But I also haven't marketed much because I don't think it's my time. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. It's probably not the time for Arab Americans because, it's the time for African Americans and Hispanics and Native Americans, but we're too new in this country.
Fortunately, I think there's still a lot of uphill battles for Arab Americans. Not that there aren't for other people of color, but you're maybe in a different place in that uphill climb than some other groups of color.
Yeah, and it's okay. You know, everything is in its own time.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to get it done, to have it documented, to have it at the Library of Congress, to have it in the military documents, you know, and so on and so forth, that yes, this person existed at one time.
Yeah. Do you think you might write any other books at any point?
You know, I go back and forth, perhaps, because this book ended when I retired from the Army, and that's been 10 years? No, 20 years. Oh my goodness. Yeah, 21 years. No, 20 years. So, you know, a lot's happened in the 20 years that I've been here in South Bend, too, in the sense that a lot of things haven't changed race-wise. And so I continue to keep a low profile, because I've had instances where people realize my background and weren't so accommodating or nice. And it hasn't gotten any better in the last 5 years. In fact, it's gotten worse. And 5 years ago, I wrote a letter to Barack Obama, which I'm sure you saw in the end of the book.
Yes.
Just highlighting my story and my disgust with how some people view others in this country and what to do about it. And he wrote me a very lovely response and gave me hope. And encouragement. Yeah. The one line that jumped out at me from that letter was, one election does not change who we are as a people. And it kind of felt like it did, but hopefully we are moving in a different direction now. We have to keep moving forward.
Every citizen has a place in our collective American story that nobody can take from them. So
yes,
it's a really lovely letter.
It brought tears to my eyes, and
I bet.
As the way I received it was almost like serendipitous, you know. And I explained that in the end of my book, how I came about to getting that reply that I did not expect at all. But I had a dream about him a week before. I'm not sure. It's in the book anyway. It's one of the most precious things I own, is that letter.
I think if you were to write another memoir, it would be, you know, just as compelling of a story, just, you know, from a different point of view, a different place in your life. And you'd be able to you'd have, you know, different insights from that different point of view.
Yes, absolutely. You know, older too. More experience.
Do you have advice for anyone who is thinking about possibly writing a memoir?
I suppose it can be called advice, right from your heart. From your heart.
Okay.
You know, and the other piece of advice that I would give, and I give that to my daughters all the time, is always be true to yourself. Don't try to please someone else, whether it be your mother, your father, be true to yourself and go with your gut feeling. I'm not sure if you got the part, because it was only really one or two sentences in my book, but it was when, even after I divorced my first husband, he battled me didn't want to pay child support. And it was going back and forth from different places I was stationed back to Kokomo. It was just wearing me out. And all the money that he would withhold and have to end up paying anyway ended up going to the lawyer, not his children.
Yeah.
But and in the end, I found out that he remarried, had 3 daughters with that second wife, basically did the same to her because I had been in contact with my neighbors there. Just up and left her, deserted her, divorced her, then deserted her, auctioned the house, the furniture, everything, and took off to go to Saudi Arabia. And then I heard again, married one more time, and had 2 sons from this wife.
Oh.
Now, none of his daughters know him. None of them, not even the other 3. And so, what do you call a man like that? That was his culture. That was his father.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. But, lots of words that I probably shouldn't say on this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, how did that happen? How do people like that? And I felt sorry for his mother because, I think I talk about female circumcision in there too, in the book.
Oh,
and
yeah, that's another.
This happened to her. Yeah, it's just a really heavy book.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I just needed to let people know because now I'm doing well. I have a good home. I have a good husband. I'm financially secure. My health is great. I have everything to be grateful for. And then when people make assumptions, oh, yeah, you have it easy. Or, oh, yeah, you can't imagine what life. I said, wait a minute.
Right. I think we often do that too easily of, oh, you've had this, and this, but we don't know the full story.
Right. Let me tell you how I got here.
Exactly. Exactly. I know you have a website, so if you can tell people where the website is and if you have any social media that you're active on.
My website is monajohnsonauthor.com. And then the best way really to get in touch with me is monajohnsonauthor@gmail.com.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Go ahead.
And Facebook is Mona Johnson Author, my Facebook.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for that. Mona, we've talked about a lot of different things, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you really wanted to mention at this point about the book or about what you hope people will take from the book? Anything that we haven't covered?
No, I think we pretty much got the gist of it. The different chapters, the different chapters will pretty much give you details on all the things that we covered. You had wanted to know who my favorite author or genre is.
Oh, yeah. Who do you like to read? What do you like to read?
Yeah, it's not really a who because I like different authors, but genres. I love reading memoirs, and I love reading nonfiction, whether it be historical or truly nonfiction, memoirs, things like that, especially about just unique stories of survivors.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I'm hoping that, anyone who deals with whatever issues I have written in the book, this whole laundry list, that they can feel that this too shall pass and they'll get through it. And they will. Just keep on trucking.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your time today, for taking the time to talk to me about the book and about your experiences. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, Sarah, thank you for having me, and thank you for your questions as well.
Thank you again to Mona for joining me to talk about her memoir, Not Created Equal. I hope if you are a fan of memoirs, or if you're a fan of learning about different cultures, different lifestyles, different family types, all kinds of different things, or maybe they're similar to your own experience, whichever you will check out. I hope that you will check out Not Created Equal, because it really is a wonderful story that has so many elements that people can and will identify with, even if their own life looks very different from Mona's life. There's so many things that are relatable in this memoir. So definitely check it out. It is a good read. It's hard at times, as memoirs often are, and we read through other people's experiences, but I think reading through those experiences, again, helps us to understand. Also, maybe sometimes helps us to better understand or shines a light on areas of our own lives where we may be struggling, and memoirs can be very, very helpful, I think. So definitely check out this book if you are a fan of memoirs. And maybe you're not a fan of memoirs, but you're a fan of short stories. Well, then you're in luck, because next episode, I will be speaking with Heather Mateus-Sappenfield about her collection of short stories. It's called Lyrics for Rock Stars. So join me for that. There are lots of stories of Colorado, where she lives, and it's a collection of stories that just kind of brings some of the Western elements of life to light, or to life. I just said life multiple times in that sentence. I apologize, but you know where I'm going. Hopefully you know where I was coming from. At any rate, it's a collection of short stories. I will be speaking with Heather on the next episode, so join me for that. As always, as we wrap things up, if you are a fan of the podcast, if you're a fan of book reviews and author interviews and all of those wonderful things, please do us the favor of a couple of things. Following on social media. I love to hear from you. Please interact with me and tell me what you're reading and what you would like to read, or how large your TBR list is. Make me feel better about my own TBR list. Tell me how big yours is. You can also write a review. You can give a 5-star review or write a nice review. That really helps us to get this podcast out to other listeners such as yourselves. So follow on social media, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Follow, but also interact. I would love to hear from you. And then the review is very, very helpful if you would like to do that and have not done so already. Thank you, as always, for joining me. I so appreciate you. I hope, again, that you're having a great day, a great week or weekend. And I hope that wherever you are, again, time of day, time of week, wherever you are, and location, wherever you are, I hope that there's plenty of time during your day to find yourself getting lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.